first session this morning is the Times Talk, Travel, the Comeback. How soon will be jetting off again, and what will be different when we do? Join our expert panelists as they share their views on when and how we'll be returning to travel. This session was recorded last week, and clearly travel restrictions are constantly changing. So for the most up-to-date information, please check www.gov.uk Foreign Travel Advice. Our expert panel for the first session is Duncan Craig, travel editor for the Times and the Sunday Times; Lisa Grainger, deputy editor and travel editor for the Times Luxx; Sue Bryant, cruise editor for the Times and the Sunday Times; and Ben Clatworthy, assistant travel editor for the Times and the Sunday Times. We do have members of the News UK team on the live chat to answer any questions you may have, so feel free to post any questions you have there. Please enjoy the Times Talk, Travel, the Comeback.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello, everyone. I am Duncan Craig, travel editor of the Times and the Sunday Times. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today, in which myself and my colleagues try and make sense of the tumultuous 12 months that we've had in travel. You think back to a year ago when we were all toasting a bumper year in the industry. I think it was over tourism and maybe the environmental footprints of all that unfettered travel were the main concerns. And then we all know what happened then. Through much of last year, we laboured under the assumption that perhaps come 2021, by dint of it being a new year, everything would be back to normal and we'd be fine again. Obviously, that hasn't happened. No great surprise there. But while it's incredibly bleak, we do think there's reason to be at least cautiously optimistic. Hence the title of this event, which is Travel, the Comeback. So let's meet the panel that we have for you today. So first of all, we've got Lisa Grainger, who is deputy editor of Times' luxury magazine Luxx, and also a travel specialist. We've got Ben Clatworthy, assistant travel editor of the Times and the Sunday Times, who certainly had an extraordinarily busy last 12 months, reporting on all the twists and the turns within travel. And finally, we've got Sue Bryant, our tireless cruise editor, who's also had a highly eventful 12 months, and in fact joins us after recovering from a nasty bout of COVID herself. So great to have you with us, Sue. Thank you. Now, enough from me. Let's get cracking with the questions. We asked you to submit your questions, and we were absolutely deluged. Some 44 pages worth of them came in the end. Thank you so much for that. And it's been incredibly valuable as a barometer, really, of your concerns, your fears, and your hopes around travel. Admittedly, some of the questions were a tiny bit niche. I enjoyed this one. Is Ben Clatworthy related to Eric Clatworthy, who worked for British Gas? So, Ben, I'm sure you'll have an answer to that in a moment. But most of the questions centered on the same sorts of themes. So we thought rather than break them up into individual ones, what we've tried to do is group them together as much as we can, with a view to hopefully offering as much insight within this 45 minutes or so as we can. So let's start with you then, Ben, if we may. And it's a question posed by dozens and dozens of the respondees. Are we, and should they essentially be writing off 2021?
Well, in answer to the first question, Eric Clatworthy, I don't know him, but I wish I did when my heating wasn't working the other day and I was freezing at home. 2021, as Duncan said, there was so much optimism and hope that with the new year, it would mean that everyone would be back to traveling as we were, back in 2019, and everything would recover. What we've seen is just before Christmas, sort of any hope of that was dented with talk of mutant strains, the EU shutting down its borders, and countless other countries barring flights from the UK as well. And it sort of felt like a bit of a setback. But that said, I think all we need to do really is not discount this entire year, but move our expectations back. At the end of last year, speaking to tour operators, travel agents, there was a lot of hope that people would be traveling come Easter. And it was what the government were telling us. Easter is going to be the new Christmas. And that's not something you've heard at a Downing Street press conference in a while now, as the reality is it's not the case. And that once again, things are moving backwards. But I think there has to be optimism for summer. Now, there is positivity on the vaccination front, but also last year, of course, a lot of people didn't travel and were shielding or stayed in the UK and certainly didn't go overseas. But there was a window of opportunity in the summer for us to travel, and lots of people did take advantage of that. If we're in a situation this year that's worse than that, then a lot is going to have gone wrong. So I think certainly come the summer, there will be an opening up, but it will be gradual again. And any idea that we're going to be returning to sort of pre-pandemic levels of travel just because we've got the vaccination would probably and sadly be wide of the mark. But there is optimism, and everyone I speak to talks about, particularly tour operators, that there is the pent-up demand, and also for the people who are fortunate enough to have made some savings in the last year, actually longer trips are selling as well. So I think there is a lot to be optimistic for, even if it's slightly later than we may have hoped for.
Pent-up demand, yes, that was definitely the phrase of 2020, wasn't it? I'm thinking about getting that emblazoned on the back of my chair at work, should we ever return to the office. Thanks for that. Sue, just turning to you, I mean, one group of travellers who I know will never be writing off anything would be cruisers. They're obviously so enthusiastic. What's the state of play with cruising, would you say? How soon until we'll be cruising again?
Cruising, like other kinds of travel, will come back slowly. I reckon, I'm optimistic, I reckon late April, early May. Cruise lines keep putting off their restart dates, but some of the smaller lines, more independent lines rather than the big companies, and also river cruises will probably come back first. And then the summer should hopefully be successful. There'll be a lot more ex-UK, a lot of people staying closer to home, sailing in the Med, I think. Some cruise lines are extending their season in the Mediterranean later into the autumn just to get more people going again, sailing again. And then 2022 will be massive.
And of course, cruising has a bit of an uphill battle, doesn't it, in terms of sort of a PR front? We can all remember those scenes from the likes of the Ruby Princess, I think it was in Sydney, the Diamond Princess in Yokohama. They've got to overcome those hurdles. So in a way, it's all about convincing passengers that things will be safe on board. Can you give us a sense? I think you took a number of cruises last year and got to experience these new measures. Can you give us a sense of the sort of measures that are being implemented to keep us all safe at sea?
Yes, absolutely. And plenty of new things have come in since I last sailed. So testing, isolating before cruising. Some lines are requiring passengers to isolate before they sail, and having to trust that they'll do it. Testing before boarding the ship. Some cruise lines have now got their own testing facilities. Viking, for example, has a lab on board one of its ships to do proper PCR tests rather than the antigen tests. Massive amounts of sterilisation, using all sorts of high-tech substances that coat everything and kill all bugs. UV lamps to clean the cabins, hand sanitizer everywhere. I mean, cruise ships really are very, very clean places. And when I sailed last year, I mean, you just get used to having your temperature taken every day and your blood oxygen saturation taken every day. You know, you stick your finger in the little machine and it gives you a score. And hand sanitizer all the time. No more buffet, obviously. Is this a loss? I think no. There are buffets, but not self-service. So you have to be served by a waiter. And wearing a mask around the ship, I mean, that's not a big deal, is it? We're all so used to wearing masks now. And I welcome it, really, wearing masks on board. It doesn't bother me. And then social distancing. So ships are sailing, ships sailed in the summer and will sail again to begin with fewer passengers on board. So more space for everyone and less queuing. So I think, and it was one of the questions that was asked more than any other, I think personally that cruise ships are very safe places. Everything has been rehearsed and set in place. So if a case is found on board, there are all sorts of protocols that will leap into action, and actually abandoning the cruise or having a ship stuck alongside, like Diamond Princess was, is unlikely to happen. I mean, the real last resort, and I'm going to stick my neck out here and say we won't have another Diamond Princess.
Fascinating. And of course, the interesting thing here is there's loads of preventative measures, but given the sort of self-contained environment on a cruise ship, if there were to be an outbreak, then that becomes a very different scenario, doesn't it? Now, you actually have first-hand experience of this, don't you? I remember having some rather interesting calls with yourself when I commissioned you to go out to the Caribbean for the comeback cruise in the Caribbean late last year. Can you give us a sense of how that was, but also more generally, what the measures are in place for an outbreak on board?
Yes, I mean, these are two different things. I mean, this was the first cruise, and obviously nobody expected a COVID outbreak on board, but they leapt into action as soon as somebody reported to the ship's doctor that they weren't feeling well. They were immediately isolated. All their contacts were isolated. Everybody was sent back to their cabin, and basically we stayed there for 4 days. But it was a new situation for the cruise line, for Sea Dream, and also for Barbados. So there was a lot of, what do we do next? I mean, the Barbados authorities were very, very strict about not letting us off until we'd had 2 different tests, and keeping the ship at the dock, no one coming and going. So what would happen in future might be a bit different, because big ships, well, all ships have got cabins now for isolation. Some have got whole decks for isolation if they need to use them. Saga, for example, has now got 2 separate hospitals on board its ship. So one, should there be a COVID outbreak, another one for all the regular reasons people go to see the doctor on a ship. So cruise lines are prepared. Agreements are in place with every port that the ship goes into. What happens if there's a case on board? Do they have to be offloaded in that port, or do all their contacts have to go with them? So everything is very, very carefully planned, which is why cruise lines are being so slow in making their comeback. So, and the approach the cruise lines are taking is, we can't stop COVID getting on board. We can do everything we can to stop it getting on board, but we might not. So therefore we have to deal with it like this when it's on board.
Lisa, if I could bring you in at this stage, obviously a luxury specialist, running through all those questions that came in, I must say there were a number which were slightly scathing about the idea of post-COVID, with everything that's happened, that in a way luxury is something that we should be dispensing with, maybe luxury travel as well. How would you respond to that?
Well, I can see that, this has been a horrific time for so many people. People have lost jobs, they've lost businesses, and worst of all, they've lost friends and families. But one of the things that's been keeping people going optimistic is they might be able to travel. And while the vast majority of our readers are not millionaires, we do have more readers than any other paper who earn over £150,000 a year, and who spend a lot of money every year on their holidays. It's their big treat, whereas some people splash out on cars or jewellery or clothes or houses. A lot of our readers actually spend it on travel. So I think luxury travel will still have a big part in their lives. But having said that, I think what luxury is will change a lot. I think instead of, luxury used to be seen as the Ritz in perhaps my grandparents' time. It was all about gold taps and marble and silk. And I think now it's more about things like privacy. So people are very worried about going somewhere and making sure it's safe. So that's why private villas are becoming much more important. Private jets for those who can afford it, private islands, and lots of big open spaces that where people can go outdoors and enjoy the outdoors. Having spent all this time in 4 walls, I think people are just desperate to get out and see extraordinary things and have wonderful experiences. I think those big bucket list trips, whether that's diving with whales or sailing in Indonesia or doing a cruise to the Antarctic or seeing the Bolshoi in Russia, people want to see stuff and do stuff. They're desperate to get out and see the world and enjoy the world, having been locked up. And I think, when they do get out and have this one big trip, they don't want to do it with hordes of people around them. I mean, if you've got the money, do you not want to go to see the Sistine Chapel after hours in more privacy, or go to St. Mark's in Venice and see it when it's closed to everyone else? These sorts of things are pretty special. And I think people are going to save up, those who've been able to, and do some pretty extraordinary things once they can.
That's really interesting what you're saying. So essentially, do you feel it's going to be more about luxury will be defined as exclusivity rather than ostentation in a way?
I think there are two different kinds of traveller. Well, there are many different kinds of traveller, but in the luxury world, I think there are still some who've never had a luxury life and they want a taste of it. You know, that old-fashioned luxury life. They want to go to a suite and drink champagne and just have a ball. There are other people who are very lucky and have had a good deal of time in hotels for business. So they've been to very, very fancy hotels, and going on holiday is not for them, going and staying in one of those big hotels and a fancy room. They want to get out of that. They want to escape that and escape their phone and their computer and cities and streets and busyness. And they want to sort of get time to have a lovely time outdoors in the fresh air and be with their families, be with their friends, and have really special, exclusive experiences. So I think that privacy is going to be very important, and small groups, and just not having to deal with big groups and hassle.
Yeah, certainly sounds appealing. Now, one question that came up, I think I'm fair to say more than any other on this, was when will it be safe to travel again? So I thought probably I'll take this on first of all, and then please guys jump in as you see fit. It's obviously a massive topic in itself. I think for me the short answer is four things have to happen. We've got to have a significant drop in infection rates. I mean, you think back to those halcyon days of last summer where 20,000 infections per 100,000 was the threshold for quarantine. Seems crazy now, doesn't it, with all the the spiraling rates that we're seeing worldwide. As part of that, I think we've got to get these mutant variants under control. We've certainly got to understand more about them. They're coming thick and fast, at the current stage, and that's sort of in a way anyone who was trying to plan around the pandemic and COVID, post-COVID, that's sort of thrown everything. So that's probably the second factor for me. And then a tipping point is obviously going to be the rollout of vaccines, isn't it? Getting us to the stage where a critical number of people have been vaccinated, but also that we understand the sense of the immunity that is conferred by that vaccination. And then the fourth and final one for me is we've got to have some measure of coherence and consistency around testing. I mean, this is just extraordinary for me. I interviewed the CEO of Wizz Air just before Christmas, Joseph Ferrari. He said the airline operates in 46 different countries and not a single one has the same measures or restrictions around COVID. Now, I mean, that's a massive global failure. And I think until that is sorted, we won't really be getting anywhere. But really, the answer that I've just given you is more about when will travel be possible again, rather than when it will be safe again. And I think that's two very different things. I mean, what is travel? Everything from walking in the Cotswolds to trekking in the Congo, that's travel. How are you getting there? Where are you going? What type of trip when you're there? There's such a variety there. And there's so many factors that feed into this. So I think critically when it comes to safety, it's going to be a matter of personal responsibility. It's going to be people giving their own personal risk assessments. And in a way, that's pretty shocking for us, having been weaned over the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years on ubiquitous travel and safe travel wherever we go. But in a way, it's not that dissimilar to, say, travel 100 years ago. And so for me, I think that's going to be a critical change, at least in the short term, that we're going to have to weigh that up on a personal basis rather than governments saying this is 100% safe. It's not going to happen. So Ben, I'll be really interested to get your take on that, and particularly with a view to vaccination passports, which is something that as we speak, it's a big issue at the moment. And I know it's something you've been looking into.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, on the point of the Wizz Air chief executive and the sort of different strategies around the world, it's so confusing for everyone. And so many things that I hear from people are people saying they don't understand what the testing regime is. I had an email just the other day from someone before the last lockdown about Jamaica saying that they found 4 different conflicting bits of information on different websites about what was needed. And until we get somewhere, as you say, that's joined up, that's coherent, it makes it travel very daunting. And for some people, travel is at least the people that Lisa mentions who are traveling all the time and staying in hotels for work and so on. Travel is not daunting for them necessarily. But for other people, and we've all been there in airports where you see families having an absolute mare, and travel can be hugely stressful. And that was before you add in the fact that there's the constant need to sanitize hands. There's the constant need to know if you've got the right documentation, if you're doing the right thing, are you abiding by the laws in the country that you're in? So I think it's until we get somewhere it's clearer, that's going to be an issue that will put people off. And as you say, it will come down to a personal risk assessment. On vaccine passports, if you call it fun, I rang around several government departments about this, and none of them can give me a straight answer on if there's any plans. Now, off the record, the government at the time that we're recording this are saying that vaccine passports are not something that the British government are looking into. Now, that may go out of date by the time you're watching this, but the ultimate reality is that if more and more countries in the world start asking for them, this week we've had the Seychelles saying that they are only going to let vaccinated travellers in. Saga, the travel and cruise company, have said they're only going to let people travel this year with vaccinations. Qantas Air, exactly the same as well. And when that happens, it begs the question, well, Whitehall and Downing Street may well not have plans to be issuing us with vaccination passports. But at the end of the day, if we can't go anywhere, the pressure will mount that they will have to come up with a solution. And what we do know is that private companies have said that they have been approached about producing documents. And it may not be that it's a state-issued thing, but I would be highly surprised if there wasn't some way that you could get proper proof of having a vaccination from the NHS. And I can't imagine that that would be as far away as we might assume it to be at the moment.
Mm. No, really interesting. It strikes me there's a real visceral reaction to this, isn't it? Something about that emotive term passport. But in a way, if this is just a way of oiling the wheels towards not just travel, it's called a passport, but we're looking at going to events, going to, I don't know, sporting events, going to the theatre, all of those as well. Do you think in a way, actually, it's not that dissimilar to these ubiquitous PCR tests that we're doing and the certification that we're having to produce for those?
Well, absolutely, in many ways. And I don't know why there is necessarily such a fear about it. I mean, a decade ago, we were having the debate in the UK about identity cards, and people were very anti them. But in Europe, they're very commonplace. And actually, it's a problem for young people when they need to prove their age, that they have to get a provisional driving license, because we don't really do widespread ID cards. There are schemes, but not a widespread thing. And actually, there are, as you say, it may be that eventually they are needed for other things, and they will have to look at a way of doing it. I took my grandmother to have hers the other week and got given a little business card style piece of card with the date of her first vaccination written on it. Now, you could see a way that in time, that when you go there, you have your picture taken at the vaccination centre, and a credit card size document with a hologram and so on is produced. Now, of course, it opens questions to forgery and so on, but it shouldn't be a scary thing. And I don't see why there's a requirement for why there is such anxiety about it. The only people I imagine should be more anxious about it, the people that are wanting to refuse the vaccine, because they may find that if these requirements come into force, that their life remains harder than other people who'd be more than happy to carry a little document to say that they've had the jab.
And doesn't it also isn't it also difficult because it may be that children or young adults don't get a vaccination for ages and ages, which may mean that families can't travel with children. If you have to produce a vaccination certificate and your children haven't had one yet, then perhaps your whole family can't travel. So I think it throws up questions about that too, or people who feel that they've got other illnesses and they don't want to take the risk of having a vaccination for whatever reason that they don't. That will disallow them from traveling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really go on, Ben.
The other thing as well is that I am still trying to get my head around is because at the moment we don't necessarily know if the vaccine stops transmission. And countries that are further lagging behind in the rollout of the vaccine, there's that issue on the horizon as well, that it may be all well and good coming from a country, touch with the UK leading the way at the moment, but actually countries that are lagging further behind won't necessarily want us just with a vaccination certificate.
Yeah, Sue may be able to back me up on this, but I read a good quote. I think it was from the CLIA, CLIA organization president, saying that a vaccine isn't a silver bullet. As long as it's used in conjunction with other COVID mitigation measures, then great. But if we're just relying on that, then that's a very different thing. Sue, have you got a take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these new measures that are in place on cruise ships are not going to go away. Even if we're all vaccinated, even cruise lines that are saying you can't get on board our ship unless you've had a vaccine, they're still going to do all the hand sanitizing. They're still going to clean the cabins the way they do, have the same protocols in place. So, but I think for a contained environment like a cruise ship, I think personally that it's justifiable to ask people to have had the vaccine, especially a line like Saga where all the passengers are over 50 anyway. So the chances are they're going to have had it. How they're going to deal with the crew who are normally under 50, I don't know. They'll have to arrange vaccination for them too. But yeah, a vaccine is just one element of this whole battle against COVID, particularly in cruising, which has obviously been in the spotlight so much.
Brilliant, thank you. Now I'm very conscious of time, which is ticking away. We've got so many questions. Lisa, if I can turn to you now, exotic destinations. Let's face it, we're all dreaming about them currently. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, how we can justify maybe visiting exotic destinations at this stage, not just from maybe the environmental concerns, but also the way that developing nations are perhaps struggling with the pandemic or trying to get back on their feet.
Well, I think if this pandemic's taught us anything, it's that we're all in one world together, and that as much as we're suffering here, other countries in exotic destinations are really suffering. So I report a lot on Africa, and there, people are not just suffering because they're indoors. They're suffering because they've got no food, because they live hand to mouth, and they have no other way of keeping alive. And I think what this has highlighted is how much they rely on tourism. They can't wait for us to come back in lots of parts of Africa. They really rely on us to bring in money for conservation, money for community work, money to help schools keep going, money to keep their clinics going. And I think that they are desperate for us to go back. So while I think we're going to have to cut back and think very carefully about how we fly because of the carbon implications, I think as long as we go on a trip that we give something to and we don't just take, I think that travel should be seen and is going to be seen as a force for good as long as you do it properly. So you go on a holiday that helps conservation, you plant forests, you stay in community-owned camps, you employ local guides, you eat locally, and you make a concerted effort to keep your carbon footprint as low as you can in that country and help to build the countries that have been affected. I think that for them, to help them, we really need to go back. So it's not that it's a luxury, it's a necessity for some parts of the world that tourism does continue.
Thank you. Sue, on that issue, in fact, the environmental implications, obviously, as a cruise editor, it's something you're dealing with all the time, but a number of questions from the respondees for this event centered on the idea, are we going to see a sort of sea change, excuse the pun, in cruising in terms of the size of the vessel, the end to these sort of leviathans, back to more sort of intimate ships that somehow are greener and better for the environment? Do you think the industry is seizing this hiatus as an opportunity to maybe change tack? There's another one. Change tack on this?
Well, ships that are coming on stream now and next year were ordered a long time ago, long before COVID was even heard of. There are trends. I very much doubt that we'll see ships get any bigger than the biggest ones, but the big cruise lines are still building big ships. But there is also a growing trend now to building more mid-sized ships, so the sort of 900 passenger mark, which to me is a much more manageable, much more pleasant size. It's nicer for the destinations when the ship comes in and there aren't 5,000 people coming off. The big growth area in cruising is expedition. So by nature, expedition ships are much smaller because they've got to be able to cope with the logistics wherever they go. Ships are getting greener, but again, the ships that are launching now, which are powered by liquefied natural gas or hybrid power, they've been ordered ages ago, but we will see more of that. We'll see more destinations introducing shore power in port, so ships don't have to sit there running their engines. We're definitely going to see better itinerary planning, shorter journeys, less of the sort of whole day at sea between ports, so you can burn less fuel. So there are many, many ways the industry is trying to become greener. And also one thing the pandemic has hastened is the scrapping of quite a lot of the older, more polluting ships, which would have been destined for the scrap heap in the next few years, but quite a lot have now gone. I mean, look, we can't pretend that cruising is the greenest form of travel because it's not, but they're trying, it's getting there, and it will get better.
Now, if we can, let's move on to the R word, refunds, which is something I must say I'm hearing less of in the last couple of months than, Ben, you'll remember most of last year, this issue, the refunds or lack of for cancelled trips and flights plagued us and plagued many travellers as well. I've got a question here from one of the respondees. How many complaints have you had about refunds for cancelled trips and flights since COVID began? Ben?
There was a period of time from about March until July when every time I opened my Twitter account, I would have messages from people tagging me into streams of complaints with various companies and so on, where it was clear people were getting nowhere. And also talking weekly to Julia Brooks, our travel doctor who writes in the Times, she had a barrage of emails, letters, tweets, and so on about people who are unable to get their money back. It was a very difficult time. Consumers were very worried about what was going to happen, where their money was, why they couldn't get it back. And similarly, travel agents and tour operators were struggling with the fact that they'd often paid out money to other suppliers, be it hotels, ground handlers, airlines, and so on, and they were unable to get their money back. And I was speaking to everyone from airlines to people who were affected by it, and it was so difficult to unravel the puzzle of where people's money had gone and be able to give people straight answers as to why they couldn't get their cash back. Now, not every organisation behaved well by any stretch of the imagination. Some behaved appallingly. Others put their hands up and said, we're doing our best. Now, luckily, those cash flow problems have started to ease in the last couple of months. As people have started booking, it's freed up, given a bit more cash and deposits to travel companies and tour operators. So there is a slowly gradual process that things are easing and people are getting their money back. Now, there will be a lot of people watching this who were given refund credit notes, some of whom didn't want them in the first place, were disappointed that their tour operators were breaking the law by not paying out cash refunds that they were asked for. The good news is that any refund credit notes issued up until the end of January 2021 are ATOL protected, which means if your tour operator goes into administration before you book another ATOL protected holiday or redeem it for cash, that your money is safe, which is good. But there are still very loud calls from some corners of the industry to change the way consumers' money is protected. And that is because in the past, if I booked a holiday with Ben's Travels would then instantly spend my cash to pay for somebody else's hotel room, somebody else's flight, and were burning through money. And there are loud calls to move to a trust fund model. A few tour operators use it, most notably trail finders, who you'll be used to seeing on the high street. They only pay out the money. They only take and use the money after the passengers have got back from their holiday. Now, I don't have a degree in accounting, but that seems to me a far safer way of moving forward. Unfortunately, it's not an overnight change. It can't happen at the click of a finger. But certainly there's a lot of questions to be asked, and for the ATOL scheme, which is run by the Civil Aviation Authority and so on, to look at how consumers' money is being spent, because the situation we found ourselves in was not fair for consumers at the end of the day, because there are a lot of people who were on furlough or who had lost their jobs and been made redundant that were unable to get cash back for a holiday that they'd booked in good faith, paid for, had been cancelled, and they were told, sorry, here's a piece of paper that says we may give you your money back in due course.
To be fair, we did get quite a few complaints about Ben's Travels, actually, but I think it's got its house in order now. Next question. How have you, and this is one probably I would like to take on, two-parter. How have you changed your editorial focus in light of COVID? And shouldn't you wait until COVID is finished before printing more travel articles? Unsurprisingly, I have some fairly strong views on that. As nice as an extended gardening leave would be for that second one, which I'll come to in a moment, I think probably not. But looking at the first one, how have you changed your editorial focus? Well, Ben, Sue, Lisa, everyone at the Times and Sunday Times will attest to the fact that COVID has been the steepest of learning curves. We've had to really change the way we do almost everything. We've had to become much more resilient. We've had to become much more agile. I mean, I can think probably off the top of my head of 10 or so entire sections that we've had to rip up and start again, often with 24 hours notice, as everything has changed, sometimes within 24 hours. So from that point of view, the complacency that maybe we used to have, where at least we knew what we were planning to run at the start of the week or the start of the day would be what we ran, that certainly went. It's accelerated our move towards digital first, which has been hugely useful because obviously as a result of COVID, fewer people traveling, advertising has come down and so have paginations. But what we've been able to do is ramp up our digital offering. And this has been hugely beneficial from the point of view, you have unlimited space. So if there are big stories that need to be tackled, we can do them. And also we don't have to hang around. We don't have to wait for maybe the weekend sections or the following day's paper. We can get those up instantly. And the whole team has become much more versed in responding quickly. And I think the reason we've had to do that really is we've gone from a situation where travel sections with national newspapers tended to be, I'd say 98% about escapism, about inspiration. And we've had to turn that on its head and balance the information with that inspiration to ensure that our readers are kept up to speed. Because frankly, we've had editorial meetings where we're sitting around and we haven't got a clue what's going on. There's so many changes happening so quickly. So if we're like that, then your average traveler arguably will be even more baffled. So we've had to really, really respond to that. And that's something that I think will certainly going forward. I mean, clearly this isn't going to end anytime soon, but going forward, that will stand us in very good stead. As to the question about whether we should stop printing travel stories altogether while COVID's on, I mean, it won't surprise you to hear that I would say an absolutely resounding no to that. We know our readers now incredibly well through comments, through emails, through correspondence. And for every one of them who comes back to us and says, hold on, should you really be encouraging us to travel at this time? I would say tenfold are asking for more. They want that inspiration. They want something to look forward to. They want something to book. They need also that assistance that I've just alluded to. The information, those questions answered, the problems solved. So all of those, I believe, gives us a real rationale to continue to do what we're doing. And yes, we're currently locked down, but look at your travel habits in a typical year. What do you do? Even the luckiest of us would travel for maybe a month in total. The other 11 months are all about pining for travel. And I think as long as you're offering an outlet for that, but doing it in a responsible way, that you're badging it in the right way, and you're making it clear that we're not encouraging you to flout any of these very, very necessary restrictions, then, I absolutely think that's what we should be doing. So that's my response to that. I'm looking at the time. Clock is definitely ticking. Lisa, come to you quickly with this one. Should we just save up for a mega holiday in 2022? That sounds great, doesn't it?
Well, I'd say yes for numerous reasons. One, because one big holiday means you're not taking as many flights, which is much better for the earth. Two, because it allows you to be a proper traveller. If you go somewhere for ages, you can really get under the skin of that country. You get to know the people better, you get to know the customs, you maybe learn a bit of the language, you go to the cities, the countryside, you really explore it, you become an old-fashioned explorer again. I think we've been jetting around here, there and everywhere, taking a summer holiday, maybe going skiing for the weekend, going to Paris, and that isn't brilliant in terms of the earth. And so I think one big holiday is good in that way. And I think when you get there, you can give more as well. You're not so much of a taking traveller. You can get involved in stuff. You can maybe even become involved in philanthropic projects. There are quite a few travellers that I talk to that have changed their lives as a result of travel, having gone to places, met the locals, discovered what they're trying to do, whether that's saving the ocean or rewilding forests or trying to save elephants, and they've thought, actually, this is what I love. I've learnt so much with this. I've loved my time here, and I'm going to give every spare cent I've got towards this project and go back every year because I want to see the people and I want to see this area do well. So I think one big fat holiday is a good thing, and also it means you don't have to keep cancelling. It's so stressful. Having cancelled 5 trips this year, I know all the stress of cancelling a trip. And I just think until we know what this virus is going to do to us, and until we know how safe the vaccine is, and whether that the virus is transmissible. I mean, if we're all vaccinated and we go to other countries and we can still pass on our strain, that's not great for the rest of the world. So I think we have to watch science and be quite thoughtful about why we want to travel and what the implications are on other people in the world. So I think 2022 is probably the safest.
Great. Now we're down to our last 5 minutes, and the question that understandably you guys will all get plagued with whenever you go to a wedding or any social event: where should we be going? Where do you want to go? And it's something that we'll quickly do, I think, probably in turn. So the question is, where will you be traveling when all this is over? Now, obviously, we discussed some of this, and when all this is over is a phrase that perhaps is a little optimistic, but the moment you're able to, let's start with you, Ben. Where will you be legging it to?
Well, I've cancelled going to Nepal 3 times for various different reasons, including the pandemic. And I found a trip there that's got biking, rafting and hiking and so on that sounds brilliant. So I'm desperate to go there. But also, after so many days sitting at home with grey weather outside, if I could go and sit on a beach, it would be back to Fiji, because that was just perfect when I was there.
Yep, so big carbon footprint, Clatworthy. Over to you, Sue.
I'd go anywhere, frankly, at the moment. But this year, I think I'll probably be staying closer to home because there's going to be a lot to write about in the Mediterranean, and the Greek islands are my happy place anyway. So I would go there. I'd go there tomorrow if I could. And also I'd go back to Spain because I had to cut short my trip to Spain, as you may remember, last year, because it was the first time the quarantine was announced, and it was announced while I was on the plane on the way there. So there was a big drama when I got there, and that was my skiing trip and some hiking in Andalusia, and I only got a few days, so that would be perfect for me.
I remember it well. Yeah, you seem to have been in the eye of the storm pretty much throughout the last 12 months.
Every trip has been a drama.
And turning to you, Lisa.
I'm just dreaming of taking a goulet and going to Turkey. I've had such wonderful holidays in Turkey, and I think one of those old-fashioned traditional goulets, sailing along the Turkish coast, diving into little blue lagoons and seas, eating fresh foods and feta cheese and olives. I'm kind of dreaming of hot sun on my skin and swimming in the sea.
Yeah, very, very good answer. And I think if you want my answer, really, it simply comes down to anywhere my family isn't. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that at all. No, loving the
I
homeschooling.
can't hear him anymore.
No, I think probably for me it would be my wife's South African. We spend a lot of time out there, and we haven't for a number of years, not just with the pandemic. I would love to explore the West Coast, up from Cape Town, the Atlantic side, up through somewhere called Paternoster. Keep going north, perhaps all the way to Namibia, and then up the Skeleton Coast and through the Namib. For me, that is exactly where I'm closing my eyes and picturing being during some of the long weeks that we've endured recently. Brilliant. So I think that's probably it from us. We've got just a number of seconds left. So I hope you found that interesting and helpful. Enjoy the rest of Destinations as well. And I would remind you that if you want to get the Times and the Sunday Times direct to your smartphone, there are digital subscriptions for as little as £15 a month. And I believe the first month is free as well. So well worth doing if you want to stay up to speed with the sort of things we're doing or commonly not doing at the moment. So that's it from us. Thanks again. And back to you, Andrew.
That was a fantastic start to the day here at Destinations TV. Check out www.thetimes.co.uk/subscribe for more details on their wonderful subscription packages. And remember to visit the Times Expert Traveller virtual stand by clicking the exhibitor list button, and you'll find it right there.